1 minute. Okay, welcome everybody to the session on technology adoption and learning. I'm the moderator of this session. My name is Maivish Moradia. I'm by default the last speaker in this session and assigned this task. We have 4 presentations in this session, loosely connected on the theme of technology adoption and learning. And the order will be Connor Mullally will go first, then Jeff, and then we have Vikas and myself in that order. We hope to keep one presentation about 16, 17 minutes and then remaining 4 or 5 minutes for Q&A.
I was originally told 20, so expect 20. Just warning you. Hi, I'm Connor Mullally. I'm an associate professor of food and resource economics, University of Florida. And today I'm presenting joint work with Sarah Jansen from Illinois, Nick Magnan and Trudy Sharma from University of Georgia, and Bola Shrestha from Heifer International. Okay, so just to motivate our paper today, there's a lot of small scale entrepreneurship in the developing world, and most of them are women. So a common intervention to try to boost incomes among small scale entrepreneurs is business training, but restrictions on mobility and just responsibilities at home could limit the ability of women to participate in business training programs, which could make it more difficult to improve women's entrepreneurship. Mobile technology, rather than requiring you to be in a classroom, could bring training to you, which could possibly loosen some of those constraints that affect women's ability to take advantage of entrepreneurship opportunities like business training. So we study this question by using a randomized control trial in Nepal, right? We offered 2 different forms of professional entrepreneurial technical training to women. One that's a traditional classroom-based form of training that we're calling TT, traditional training, and a different form of training, which we're calling hybrid distance learning, which replaces a portion of classroom time with studying at home on a tablet using the same curriculum that's covered in the traditional training. The goal of the training is to become certified as a community animal health worker. A community animal health worker provides basic veterinary services like deworming, injections, castration. And we're working in a context where livestock are really important, rural Nepal. So we look at intent to treat effects of being offered training, as well as local average treatment effects. So the effects of completing training on individuals who take the training when it's offered, of each training component, training type relative to a peer control group, as well as comparing the impact of each training system to the other. We find strong impacts of hybrid distance learning on the likelihood of completing training. Both forms of training increase knowledge, but distance learning also boosts the responsibilities that women have for managing the household's own livestock. We don't find any average impacts on income or savings, but we do find some impacts below the median of income using quantile regressions. We hypothesized based on what people said about the number of client visits they were doing pre and post COVID lockdown, that really undermined the likelihood that we were going to find impacts on average income. So just give you a little bit of the context for this project. Livestock are a big portion of GDP in Nepal. If you're in rural Nepal, you own some livestock, probably some goats or some chickens. Extremely important part of the rural economy. Our implementation partner for this project is Heifer International's office in Nepal. As part of the main focus of their programming is building women's self-help groups that eventually evolve into livestock cooperatives that are either focused on dairy or producing meat goats. So they're going to have a lot of demand for animal health services, a lot of potentially unmet demand. These cooperatives, all their members are women. There are about 250 of them in Heifer's program area, and they have about 1,000 members each. Okay. So to become a community animal health worker in Nepal, you have to study a government approved curriculum, pass a certification exam, and become registered with your local municipality. As part of its programming, Heifer supports the training of community animal health workers. They pay for the training, and they also give them a startup kit that has deworming pills, a microscope, and other things you need to do that particular job. The cost is about $430 to do the traditional classroom-based training. If you want to do traditional classroom-based training, you actually have to go live at a training center, stay in a dormitory for about 35 days. So that could obviously be a big barrier to becoming a community animal health worker for women who are going to have more responsibilities at home, expected to do more chores, expected to be the primary caretakers for small children. And just because of cultural norms, families might hesitate to let women stay unaccompanied outside the home for that extended period of time. Looking at our data, how far away people are from the training centers, it's just not practical to do your household responsibilities while also living at a training center. So in contrast to traditional training, distance learning uses the same curriculum, government approved curriculum as traditional training, but rather than staying at a training center for 35 days, you do a 5-day orientation. You spend 10 days at the end of the training period doing hands-on practice and taking your final certification exam. But in between, you spend 30 days studying at home with a tablet. So the tablet has the same curriculum, but it has learning tools. It has different media. So you're not just reading out of a book. As you would be if you were doing traditional training. It also includes a virtual discussion board where you can ask questions of a veterinarian at a local training center, and about 3/4 of trainees use that function of the tool according to our data. Whether we worked with the government of Nepal to make sure that regardless of which training system you took, if you passed your exam, you were certified to work as a community animal health worker in Nepal. And the cost of distance learning is about the same as traditional training once you factor in the cost of the tablet. Okay, so thinking about whether distance learning is going to be successful in alleviating constraints that might otherwise prevent women from participating in these types of programs, if mobility is a limiting factor, so perhaps you could spend some time outside the home, but not 35 days, then distance learning could be quite effective. If the problem is you just don't have time to train, distance learning could be effective, or it might not, because it still requires time. It still requires the ability to sit down and do the work, focus on what you're doing. And if you're training in the home, you're not necessarily going to get a pass all of a sudden on the chores that you would otherwise be doing. Of course, if being a community mental health worker is seen as an inappropriate profession for women, then neither training system is going to be effective in building women's entrepreneurship. Okay. So in our experiment, we had 104 of these livestock cooperatives, and we were training community animal health workers to work with the members, provide animal health services to the members of these different cooperatives. We did a demand assessment to see how many new, I'll say cause to be more terse going forward, the cause they could support. They had to meet specific criteria as prescribed by law. You have to basically have completed the Nepali equivalent of high school. And have some other criteria in order to be able to be certified as a community animal health worker. Did a baseline survey. As part of that survey, we gauged who was interested in training and trimmed everybody who wasn't interested. And we made sure that there were enough candidates nominated in each cooperative so that we could have control women in each cooperative, as well as women who were randomly picked to be invited to training within each cooperative. So at the cooperative level, cooperatives were assigned to distance learning or traditional training. And we stratified on characteristics we expected might be associated with the different outcomes we would look at. And then after assigning the training system at the cooperative level, within cooperatives, we assigned women to treatment or control. And if you were assigned to treatment, you were given an invitation to participate in CA training, distance learning, or traditional training, depending on what your cooperative was assigned to. I'm not going to go through the sample balance table, but it looks fine. And if you really want to see it, we can look at it. There was some attrition. We followed up with 90% of our sample at Endline. We had to do data collection by phone, but we still were successful in getting a good follow-up rate, and attrition was perfectly balanced was so balanced by treatment assignment that we actually can't estimate bounds on treatment effects because we just don't have enough variation in the dropout rate by treatment. So we feel pretty good about that. Okay, let's look at some results. So these are intent to treat effects of being offered training on completing training. And all the results you're going to see are from regressions of progressing an outcome indicator on indicators for being assigned to either treatment, lagged outcomes, and stratum fixed effects. The third row there, it says difference, shows that being assigned to distance learning rather than traditional training boosts the likelihood of completing training by about 30 percentage points. And that's a precisely estimated effect. So being offered this new type of training as opposed to the traditional classroom-based training has a strong effect on the probability that a woman in our study becomes a community animal health worker. Okay. Now, looking at impacts on knowledge and management, here we have the intent to treat effects and local laboratory treatment effects for distance learning. The first three columns are impacts on the number of correct answers to exam questions about livestock. And then as well as the fourth column there is the impact on the overall score for those exam questions. And then in the rightmost two columns, we have impacts on the number of management tasks that are being carried out at home. So easy tasks, as well as more difficult tasks. An easy task might be like, I don't know, cleaning out housing, and a harder task would be handling large livestock or doing an injection. And we see pretty large and fairly precisely estimated impacts across the board. So for example, looking at impacts on management tasks, those intent to treat effects say that as a result of being assigned to distance learning, women complete about one more easy task and one more hard task at home as part of managing the household's own livestock. For traditional training, as you might expect, because of the lower completion rate, we have less precisely estimated effects. We only see significant impact on the overall exam score. And then again, but the point estimates for traditional training are pretty similar to the point estimates for distance training. And that shows up when we look at differences in impacts by training system, when we don't see many significant differences in the treatment effects of the two training systems, just for a number of easy management practices. Okay, so here are impacts on income. We see a lot of imprecisely estimated effects. The two cases where we do see significant impacts are here. So this is the local average treatment effect of distance learning on a binary indicator for solely controlling at least some of the household's income. And we see that the complier effect for distance learning is about a 31 percentage point increase on the likelihood of controlling at least some of the household's income independently of your husband or anybody else in the household. And then we see a marginally significant effect for traditional training for earning at least some non-farm income. For example, being a community animal health worker and earning income from that. Okay. We see some positive impacts on aspirations as well. So this candidate aspiration index, if you're familiar with the inverse covariance weighted indices, they can use to summarize different outcomes through that paper by Michael Anderson in 2008. These impacts are measured in number of standard deviations of the index. So that intent to treat effect for distance learning says that being assigned to distance learning relative to control boosts candidate aspirations by about 0.35 standard deviations. And then the complier effect is about twice that at 0.716. And that index is built using all of the other outcomes that you see in this table. When we look at traditional training, we actually see negative point estimates with no significant effects. And then when we look at the difference in treatment effects for the two training systems, we actually see significantly larger intent to treat effect on aspirations for traditional training relative, or for distance training relative to traditional training. But that doesn't show up with the local average treatment effect. So some evidence that hybrid distance learning was more effective than traditional training in boosting aspirations. So here, the way that we built this table was ran two logit models of the likelihood of completing community animal health worker training. First with women who were assigned to distance training, and then secondly with women who were assigned to traditional training, regressed that binary outcome on the characteristics that you see in this table, as well as stratum fixed effects and legged outcomes, and then compared the coefficients on each of these characteristics from the distance training model and the traditional training model. And what that comparison tells you, and that comparison's in the third row here, the difference in the coefficients from those two models. What that comparison tells you with that number in the difference row tells you is how the effect of being offered distance training rather than traditional training changes as you change one of these characteristics. So we know that being offered distance training rather than traditional training on average boosts the probability of completing training by about 30 percentage points, right? But if you take the average woman and you boost the value of this technology index measures familiarity with mobile phones, internet. Do you have a Facebook page? How often do you use it? That kind of thing. If you raise that technology index by 1, that average effect goes up by 0.06, so by 6 percentage points. So the more technologically savvy you are, the more effective distance training is relative to traditional training. The more mobile you are, the more effective distance training is than traditional training. And the less empowered you are, the more effective distance training is than traditional training. That's what that negative sign tells us there. It's actually better relative to traditional training if you tend to be on the less empowered side. Being further away from the training center reduces the relative effectiveness of distance training, but the effect is really small. Here we see a really large effect for women who have an infant relative to women who do not have an infant, and that's at baseline. The relative effectiveness of distance training as compared to traditional training goes up by 43 percentage points for women who have an infant at baseline versus women who don't have an infant at baseline. And that is a group for whom you would expect this technology could really relax constraints on participating in training, right? The women who can't go live at a training center because they have a small child at home. There's no daycare at these training centers. Household size associated with a smaller relative effectiveness of distance training. Perhaps the bigger the household you have, the more responsibilities you have at home, the more distractions there are, the harder it is to study your tablet. For households that have a migrant, we see that a really strong impact on how relatively effective distance training is as compared to traditional training, a boost of 40 percentage points on how likely you are to complete training. So I would say more or less the women for whom we would expect distance training to be most effective, it is in fact most effective for them, right? You have a migrant, so you have even more responsibilities at home because the labor endowment of your household has shrunk, right? Therefore, you benefit even more from the flexibility afforded to you by training with a tablet rather than going to live at a training center. You have an infant, it's impossible for you pretty much to go live at a training center, but once you get one of these tablets, you're able to become a community animal health worker because of the extra flexibility it gives you. Okay, so I'll just briefly go through this. I just wanted to show that despite the fact that we have no effects on average income, we do see some effects below the median on total household income, although marginally significant at the 10% level, at the 15th percentile, as well as the 25th percentile. These are intent to treat effects measured using quantile regressions. That's in the first column there. So shifts that 15th percent of the distribution and the 25th percent of the distribution, each by about, I can't remember, those are in dollars, right? By $500. And then in the third column, we also see some impacts below the median on jointly controlled income. So how much income you control yourself along with another family member. And those are actually, the effects on income control are pretty precisely estimated. Don't see any precisely estimated effects for traditional training. And then when we look at the difference in quantile intent to treat effects, you see some significant differences by training system on the amount of income that's jointly controlled, with a significantly larger effect for hybrid distance learning. We also did some work to look at, try to disentangle to what extent the difference in relative effectiveness is attributable to who selects into training versus the effectiveness of the training system itself. I'm not going to go into that because of time constraints, but not going to go into it too deeply, but it seems that there's no clear evidence that traditional training is allowing poor quality candidates to complete the community mental health worker training program. Although if anything, it's the case that hybrid distance learning is a more effective training system than traditional training. And you may have some marginally poor quality candidates completing the community mental health worker training program as a result of being offered distance learning as opposed to traditional training. And the combination of those two effects, they offset one another, right? You're allowing slightly worse candidates to complete training, but you're offering them a better training system. So at the end of the day, when you look at impacts on things like management and knowledge, they're about the same in each training system. Just to recap here, we compare these two different training systems, a classroom-based system and then hybrid distance learning. We don't see any impacts on average income, but we do see some impacts on income below the median. No effects on savings. Both systems have impacts on knowledge. We see impacts on home management indicators of the traditional, or the hybrid distance learning system. And those impacts on management were significantly larger for the hybrid distance learning system. We also see that for specific subgroups for whom we might expect hybrid distance learning to be most effective, that it is in fact most effective. And my main takeaway from this study is that we see strong evidence that hybrid distance learning could be a valuable tool for boosting women's access to entrepreneurial training opportunities going forward. And that's it.
We have about 2 to 3 minutes for Q&A.
I may have missed this, but you have the info on where the suppliers are in the distribution. So you can find sort of income effects in the lower qualifiers, but are those suppliers that you reported as right? Yeah. So the question is, where are the compliers in the income distribution, correct? So actually, I'm not sure. So I know there are techniques you can use to generate summary statistics for compliers versus the sample as a whole. And I don't think we ever did that. So that is something that I could check. Yeah, I don't know. Yes. Oh, sorry.
I cannot hear in the room.
So the question is, what outcome did we use to measure learning? So we had on our survey, we had a series of questions about just livestock knowledge and livestock practices, broken into easy questions, intermediate questions, and hard questions. And we asked those at baseline as well as follow-up. Impacts on how many questions you got right. So what proportion of the total possible correct responses did you give in your survey response? And then we also had indicators of which management practices you carry out at home.
We had one over here and then Simanti on the online, so 2 more.
Thanks for your presentation. Long ago, I was reading about the status of dogs and fortunately median dogs that reflected in the United States versus the then Soviet Union. Fortunately, is the physicians in the Soviet Union. But then fine print at the bottom said doctors in the Soviet Union at that time is a very low status profession. So I'd like to hear more about a community mental health worker. Is this someone who really can control a crisis in charge? Are they working for the public sector and therefore not able to make a lot of money? Is this what other positions might they go into if they kind of training?
Okay, so the question is, there are a couple of questions there. So one is, are they public employees versus private entrepreneurs? They're totally private. So some of them, they might have professional relationship with a government veterinarian, but they are totally private. So they're free to charge whatever price they want. I don't think this is the case in our particular study, but it is sometimes the case that community animal health workers trained with heifers support become so successful that they completely exit livestock production. Those are probably exceptional cases, but it does happen. For this particular intervention, again, we don't see impacts on average income. So I wouldn't say that as a result of what we did specifically, people are making enough money to support the whole household. Although who knows, maybe that could happen down the road. You had another question, I'm forgetting. Okay, so I would say its status increasing, and that shows up in our aspirations index, part of which is how many people would seek your advice, men as well as women. I don't remember off the top of my head if we see significant impacts on that indicator, but the signs are positive, and we included them in the survey because we expected them to have a positive effect. So.
Final question, Seventy, if you can be a little brief and let comment.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had a question online, but I don't know if you are fielding a question from the room.
No, they
We're
are done. We are waiting for you now. You're the final.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So thank you so much for your presentation. It was very, very interesting. My question is about that variable, if the family has a migrant. So I was wondering, in your data, do you have information on whether the migrant, whom I'm assuming is somebody who stays somewhere else, is sending remittances back into the family? Because that might be pretty interesting to look at. Because so yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Yes, we do have that data. We haven't looked at that as a separate outcome, but that could potentially be another mechanism that is driving the fact that we see bigger impacts on households that have a migrant. Maybe it's just because they're more affluent.
I'm also thinking that if you have a migrant who is sending a remittance, then your chances of completing the module might be actually less compared to if you don't have that income that's coming from outside. So that was my hypothesis for asking that question. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks once again. And Lou going to present something on Nigeria and fertilizer.
Thank you. All right, so I'm presenting on private sector-led agricultural technology adoption with experimental evidence from Nigeria, sorry, OCD. Okay, and this represents joint work with Sueda and Serge and Andrew, and sort of dates back to when we were all at Michigan State. Many of us have gone on to other places now. The field work was done way back then, and we're now just writing the results. Yeah, don't give up on papers. Sometimes you can write them in the future. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the motivation that I think a lot of us in this room are familiar with. Classic models of agricultural development sort of hinge on this agricultural productivity growth and the adoption of innovative agricultural technologies. This observation that agricultural workers in the richest 10% of countries are 50 times more productive than agricultural workers in the poorest 10% of countries. And part of this gap might be due to sort of low levels of improved fertilizer use in the poorest countries around the world. At the same time, we have this triple challenge around the world to try to promote agricultural productivity growth, particularly in areas with low levels of productivity, promote sufficient, nutritious, and safe food supply, particularly in areas with lots of food insecurity, and also mitigate damages associated with environmental and climate change. So part of the way forward here is perhaps we can understand barriers to the adoption of productive and climate smart agricultural technologies. And I'm going to talk about some of the challenge to doing this, and maybe some of the sort of opportunity to do this. So we are, in this paper, we're going to report on results from a randomized control trial with a private fertilizer company and rice farmers in Kwara State, Nigeria. So we're going to try to investigate the role of a price discount in a combination with sort of the standard business as usual marketing services of this private fertilizer company. So we have two treatments. One is this business as usual marketing, which includes demonstration plots, field days, a guaranteed sort of supply of this fertilizer in the village or close to the village. And then also 4 folks in that treatment group who are also receiving this business as usual marketing. We provide a 25% discount on the purchase of USG. And I'll talk about the technology now. So typically farmers broadcast prilled urea, which is a type of fertilizer, just by sort of casting it across their plot or their fields. This is often thought as being fairly inefficient. It can lead to nitrogen runoff and associated environmental damage. Urea supergranules and the associated deep placement method sort of represents an improved technology. So it's more efficient, requires less total fertilizer. It leads to less runoff because you're sort of putting the fertilizer directly into the ground, and it's associated with, at least in agronomic trials, positive private returns, and then due to some environmental benefits, also positive social returns. However, this requires sort of a lot of specific practices for the optimal use. So level fields, constant irrigation, and also sort of a relatively rigid application timing practice. So this perhaps represents a sort of barriers to the adoption, or at least the optimal use of this fertilizer. Okay, so we partner with this private fertilizer company, and we use village level randomization. 30 villages are in the treatment group, 15 villages are in the control group. All treatment villages receive business as usual marketing, and a random subset of farmers in treatment villages receive a 25% discount on the purchase of this improved fertilizer. Controlled villages receive no treatment. Estimation approach is fairly straightforward here. We're using N-line data to estimate intent to treat effects. We use binary fertilizer use to estimate adoption rates, quantity of fertilizer used, and then rice yields. We also estimate an ANCOVA specification, which controls for the baseline of the outcome variable, particularly when we're looking at rice yields, to try to get more power out of that estimation approach. All right, so the treatment increases USG, this improved fertilizer, and reduces urea, the sort of old substitute fertilizer. We can see this in the pooled treatment here, but also when we disentangle these two treatment groups, the additional discount increases the adoption of this new fertilizer from 0% at baseline for an additional 8 percentage points over the no discount treatment group. We see the disadoption of urea. This is sort of expected. This is the fertilizer that is no longer really necessary if you're adopting the new technology. We also see noisy but fairly substantial declines in NPK, and this is sort of the first hint that something is maybe not going quite right here. NPK is a complementary fertilizer to USG. It's a complementary fertilizer to urea as well, and if you're using USG without sort of the appropriate amount of NPK, you're not going to sort of get the yield results, the yield effects that you might expect from agronomic trials of USG. So just to summarize these results, both demonstration and discounts motivate adoption. The additional discount provides an additional 8 percentage points of the adoption rate. We see a disadoption of prilled urea, the substitute technology, but we also see a disadoption of NPK, which is a complement technology. So this is perhaps because farmers purchase or used to purchase urea and NPK as a bundle. So when you start disadopting urea, they're also sort of by nature disadopting NPK, and perhaps due to sort of a misunderstanding or an overselling of USG by of the new technology by the company. All right, so now we're looking at the outcome variable is the quantity of fertilizer used. Can we see quantity increases for USG, quantity decreases for urea? Still, noisy, not statistically significant, but substantial declines of the quantity used of NPK. I'm just going to reference these really quick. We look at a very simple sort of production function and plug in these values of the quantity used of each of these fertilizers. And treatment group farmers using USG, their expected yields are higher than control group farmers. But when we're looking at the amount of urea or NPK that they're using, their expected yield is actually lower than control group farmers. So this is sort of another sort of foreshadowing of the effects that we're going to be looking at on the yield effects of our treatment in just a couple of slides. All right, so we can ask the question now using these results on the quantity of fertilizers: was this discount worthwhile for the fertilizer company? If this is a technology that we want to promote, and this is this discount increased the adoption of this technology by an additional 8 percentage points, is this something that the company would want to do sort of privately for their own profit maximization interests? So here we're looking at just a simple linear profit function, both without the discount and with the discount. And what we find is that this is only profitable for the company when the input costs are roughly 25% of the undiscounted an output price. So this is a relatively high markup, and perhaps might not be out of the question, but we sort of take this result to say that this is probably not sort of privately profitable for the fertilizer company. If this is a technology that we want to boost the adoption of, then we're probably going to need outside funding to sort of provide this additional discount if we want to do such a thing. All right, so does this treatment increase rice yields? We find that it doesn't. So looking at the pooled treatment, both in an ANCOVA specification and not, and also when trying to disentangle the results of each treatment group, we find pretty substantial negative or declines in yield, but not statistically significant. So we can't really rule out that nothing happened as well. So this raises the question, maybe these are all intent to treat effects. Maybe we can sort of say, maybe there are yield effects amongst folks who actually participated in our program in some way. So we define experimental participation in a couple ways: visiting a field day, visiting a demonstration plot, receiving a voucher, and then combinations of these things. And we can estimate these treatment effects on the treated results in an instrumental variable setup. And again, we find sort of null effects or negative effects that are relatively large in magnitude, but we still can't rule out the fact that maybe nothing was happening here as well. So what explains the lack of productivity effects? We failed to reject null on intent to treat effects and treatment on the treated effects. Our treatment does not include or does not lead to increased yields, even for those who participated in the intervention in some way. So one reason for this could be that farmers aren't actually trying to maximize yield, they're trying to maximize profit. We don't have a great measure of farmer profit, but one way that farmers could do this would be, instead of trying to increase their revenue, they're just going to cut their costs. We find no evidence that treatment group farmers are reducing the value of or quantity of key inputs like labor, seeds, or pesticides, or other inputs. Another possibility is that treatment group farmers are not adopting all of the other recommended practices that are sort of necessary for the optimal use of this new technology. So I mentioned before, the optimal use of USG requires constant irrigation, leveled plots, use of improved seed. All of these things may take farmers a long time or some time to adopt as well. And we find no evidence that any of the treatment group farmers are really using these recommended practices in a way that's different than control group farmers. And this is consistent with other research that Soeda and Serge have done, showing that USG use leads to an increase in rice yields, but only for those who are using the recommended practices. All right, so the business as usual marketing practices of this private fertilizer company inspires the adoption of improved technology. So the private sector has a role in development, and this additional discount that they provide further incentivizes adoption. But offering this additional discount may not be profitable for the fertilizer company. So the public sector may have a role in subsidizing these discounts if we wanted to do such a thing. But we also might not necessarily want to do such a thing for this particular intervention because we're not seeing sort of increased rice yields. And this is sort of despite the fact that the USG use is associated with higher rice yields in our data when we're not accounting for the experimental design in our approach. And agronomic field trials consistently show that USG, using USG in an optimal way leads to higher rice yields. So the real sort of returns to USG may not be immediately sort of available to us right now. It might take time for farmers to learn how to optimally use USG, and so it might be too early to say that USG is not doesn't actually lead to increased rice yields in a real world scenario. And that is all I have. Questions?
Just to go back to the graph where I think you asked the question whether something was worth it.
Yeah, so he's asking to go back to this slide.
Expected value of what?
This is just a profit. Yeah.
And then you got
Price minus cost times quantity. It's just a simple like linear profit function. It could be more like complicated than this, but yeah.
Okay, maybe a follow-up question. Like, is it possible to go similar analysis for the farmers like this, or you're concluding that it's not worldwide because actually
Yeah, I mean, like farmers could have a variety of different objectives. We're not seeing sort of yields increases. We also don't see a ton of evidence to suggest that it's like increasing their profit. So, you know, if it would be interesting to have more data for like what are farmers actually doing after the intervention ends. Like if they're not using this technology again, then obviously like that behavior sort of speaks loudly. But that would sort of require like more data.
Well, I guess the first question, you know what happened with subsequent disadoption, and the second question, training costs.
Yeah, so we don't like, yeah, sorry. First question was, do we know what happens with like subsequent disadoption? The answer to that is not really. We don't have more rounds of data beyond the like initial follow-up. And then the second question was, can you repeat?
Do you know how much the training?
Oh yeah, I don't know precisely how much the training costs. Partly because that was sort of not part of the intervention that was funded out externally. That's just like what the private company does when they enter a new village. That's just like part of their standard. Like when we enter a new village with a new products from trying to sell things, like we set up you know, demonstration plots and things like that. The intervention funded the discount. Yeah.
Are there any questions on that? There is one. Let me just check. Please go ahead.
I'm just curious whether there's evidence that USG works in that context to improve yields. Because I'm just thinking maybe there's just something, there's literature saying technology doesn't transfer well.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Okay. The question was, is there evidence that the technology that USG increases yields in Nigeria specifically? So yes, the paper that I cited by Soweda and Serge are co-authors on this paper. They found that that took place in Nigeria, and they did find that farmers who used USG and then also did all these other sort of recommended practices did experience increased yields. And there's a lot of agronomic trials from not only Nigeria, but Bangladesh and India showing that USG in those settings, like very, very controlled settings, leads to increased rice yields. Mm-hmm.
So thinking about like the role of the public sector, and maybe like another question asked going forward, would it be potentially possible to, in a theoretical experiment, add in a randomized like treatment of extension so that you can essentially estimate the rate of optimal versus suboptimal use and use that as kind of a way to going forward if you want these fertilizers and these lower greenhouse emissions products to be adopted using that and trying to figure out what countries would need to invest in that type of extension work.
Okay, so the question is like, can we develop a different like research design to try to figure out like where is it being used optimally, where is it being used suboptimally? I think we probably could do that. It would take a lot of money, I'm sure. Do we have time?
Maybe you already asked and
Did you consider people who had already been using ESG in the past? It seems like you could kind of gain some context if they might have past experience and know that NK actually does these things.
Yeah, so in this setting, no one used USG at baseline. So the private company like put a lot of sort of investment into figuring out how to reduce the cost of producing USG and distributing it. So before that sort of innovation on their part, it was not available on the market. So yeah.
Okay, we still have maybe 30 seconds if you want to.
So I just wondering if it would be, more insightful to expand the productivity, the number of productivity indicators, moving beyond just on productivity.
So
broadening your discussion of productivity in general.
so labor productivity measured in what way, like wages or something, or?
Not with the cost of fertilizer, right? Because it could affect people, they got into the farm, right? So it might well if you want to look at.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay, I got. Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah. So I didn't show those results, but we do sort of look at the amount of labor used by farmers, and we don't find that it really changed very much. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
I don't see any questions online, so let's end that. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Vikas Garai from University of Wisconsin, and you can upload your.
Okay. Oops. I have to share with the Zoom as well. Is all right. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Vikas. I'm a fourth year PhD student at UW Madison, again applied economics department. So we are working on this paper on wage gap between foreign and US born agriculture, land grant university scientists in the US with my co-author Jeremy Fords. He's my advisor. So foreign born population in the US has grown a lot recently. So in 2018, it was like 44.8 millions. Foreign born, lot of studies suggest that foreign born population in general constitutes about 17% of the labor force in the US. At the same time, foreign born constitutes about 26% of the STEM workforce in the US. They own about 28% higher quality patents, and they also hold 31% of all the PhDs here. There are several studies suggesting that foreign-born population, mainly inventors, are more productive than US-born during their entire life cycle. In academic setting, foreign-born academic scientists produce 26% more scholarly work than the US-born scientists, according to some of the research. So the question is, are the foreign-born people or are rewarded with the same wages? There are like mixed evidences. On average, foreign-born earn, there are some studies suggesting that foreign-born earn about lower wages than the US-born. However, there are other studies suggesting that in the general labor force market in the US, foreign-born earn 4% more than the US-born in the bachelor's and higher category in the general labor force market. In academic setting, foreign-born scientists earn about like $6,000 lower than the US scientists. So that's some of the research suggesting. So what we are going to do in this paper is we are estimating the wage gap between the foreign-born and the US-born academic scientist in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, we call it CALS, in 52 land-grant universities in the US. What we are doing is we are using this novel survey data, which were conducted in 2005 and 2015 of over 1,400 scientists. We identify in this paper, we are identify this direct and indirect, that is a systemic wage discrimination. And we are also going to conduct Kitagawa-Ohaka blinder decomposition to check whether there exists any wage discrimination. Finally, we test like various underlying mechanisms, like why this kind of, if there is any wage gap, why this wage gap exists. So we contribute in different literatures. So in first literature so there is a large literature on the racial wage gap in the US, which is mostly focused on like whites and African Americans or Hispanic wage gap. In this paper, however, we are studying the wage gap between the foreign-born, which may not totally constitutes in this African Americans or Hispanic category. So we are taking a broad range of people who belongs to like 52 different countries in all the 7 regions of the world. We also contribute in the literature in the, so that is, there is a large literature on gender wage gap. Also there is literature in academic setting, but which is usually focusing on like one university or like one department and with a very limited faculty characteristics. On the other hand, what we are going to use, like we study a broad academic spectrum covering like 52 universities, various departments and like very extensive faculty characteristics. Finally, there is little evidence on like wage discrimination due to indirect, or we call it as a systemic discrimination. We contribute in this literature by conducting this decomposition analysis, separating direct and indirect part of the wage discrimination. Very briefly, what we found, we find that foreign-born scientists earn about 4% less than the US-born faculty. That is about more than $500 in yearly wages. We conduct this decomposition strategy and we find that about 2/3, that is about 67% of the gap is due to a labor market wage discrimination. It is not just a differences, but it is a discrimination. We do not find evidence on signal inflation. That is a one part of a systemic or indirect discrimination. I'm going to talk about what is signal inflation later, but we do not find evidence on that. Finally, we find that the wage gap is higher for the scientists who are coming from countries with the non-English speaking language of instruction during their undergrad schooling. We also find that the wage gap is higher for scientists coming from sub-Saharan Africa countries and Latin American Caribbean country, which we usually find in the literature. So what data we are using? We are using 2 waves of survey that were conducted in 2005 and 2015 by my advisor and some of his teams at that point of time. They obtained a census of all the faculty in the 52 land-grant universities. They obtained the names of all the faculties, and they created the cross-sectional sample frame there. They randomly selected scientists and sent them this web-based survey. The response rate was about 40% in 2015 and 60% in 2005. So we have a data of about 3,000 scientists. And in this data, we cover like all the departments in like mainly the 7 fields like plant science, social sciences, so forth. And we have data on a broad range of categories like a gender, age, education, academic positions, so on and so forth. So in our final sample, we have 1,045 scientists in 2005 and more than 600 in 2015. So we restrict our sample to only tenure track scientists because the salary structure of the tenure track and non-tenure track faculty might be different. Our primary treatment variable is a foreign born, which is an indicator 1 if the scientist has a bachelor's institute outside of the US. So we are using a proxy of a bachelor's institute as a proxy for their birth country. And our primary outcome variable is the annual salary in logs and levels. We use this simple, commonly used empirical framework in the wage gap literature, where you compare like 2 groups, like men or women, or like foreign born and US born in this case. So here, Y is the salary of a scientist I in university U, and foreign is an indicator 1 if the scientist was born outside of the US. We include university and survey fixed effects, and also field fixed effects and other characteristics as well. Very briefly, I want to talk about this decomposition. So this decomposition is usually done to separate out, to identify direct and indirect discrimination in the wages. So what we do is we simply regress separately for foreign born and for the US born scientists and calculate different betas. And then the wage gap between the US and foreign born scientists can be expressed from the equation number 3. And what we get is here, this wage gap can be put into like 2 parts. So one is the explained part, which can be attributed to the differences in the characteristics of 2 groups, like foreign born and the US born. And there is the second part, which is the unexplained part, which is typically considered as a wage gap, wage discrimination. So this is due to how the foreign and US born scientists are compensated for the same characteristics, but they're compensated differently for the same characteristics. And that is a typical labor market discrimination. Very briefly, this descriptive statistics of US born and foreign born, on average, we find that foreign born earn about $7,000 lesser than the US born faculty. They less likely to be having a tenured position. Also less number of years experience, and they produce about 60% more journal articles than the US born faculties. And they are less likely to have like extension and administration appointments here. Very briefly, to understand like the commonly used techniques in the universities, like to determine wages. So the first thing they use as a experience. So we try to plot on the left hand side, the figure is a wages versus experience. And we do not find any subtle differences in the wages based on experience. So we need some regression techniques there. On the right hand side, we plot wages and number of journal articles. And here we find that foreign born earns lower for the same number of journal articles than the US born faculty. And then, so whether this gap is significant or not, to understand that, we conduct this regression analysis further. So we'll come to these results. So this is our results. Results suggest that foreign born scientists in all of these specifications, all of these models, foreign born scientists earn lower than the US born faculty. And the first panel is the salaries in thousands, and the panel B is the salaries in log. In all of this, we find it. So the first column is like without any controls, we find that foreign born earns about 7,400 lesser than the US born faculty. And once you include all the controls and like all the fixed effects, we find that they earn about like almost 4% lower than the US born scientists in annual wages. The decomposition strategy, what it suggests that, so this the top panel suggests that there is a differences about like $7,000 in the salaries of foreign born and US born. And in the bottom panel, we as we talk about this explained and unexplained part. So this unexplained part, which suggests that about 2/3 of this gap is because of this unexplained part, So which is considered as a labor market discrimination. We conducted a bunch of robustness checks. So first question is like, maybe the quantity of publication might not matter, but the quality of the publications matters. So what we did is we collected data from the Web of Science on the number of citations. And then we run the regression with the quality adjusted publications. And if we have time, I'll go through that. But once we run that, we find the gap is even getting wider after we control for this quality adjusted citations or publications. Secondly, we also drop a weekly working hours variable. As we find in the descriptive statistics, foreign born scientists are working more than the US born scientists on weekly hours. We drop that variable because then there could be a reverse causality issues, like more salaries affect you to make you work more, or if you're working more, you have more salaries. So we also drop that variable and we don't find any changes in the results much. There are also some concerns that foreign born may have less likely to have administrative appointments. So we restrict our sample to scientists with no any formal administrative appointments, and we also do not find any measurable change there. Similarly, we also found this because administrative positions might have like higher wages. So we also drop that administrative variable, appointment variable, and we also do not find a lot of changes in that. We try to explain like why this is happening, why foreign bonds are earning lower salaries than the US born faculty, even though foreign bonds produce like more than 60% articles than the US born. So the one thing which is a part of a indirect discrimination, or we call it as a systemic discrimination. So we test for this signal inflation. So what is signal inflation? So a signal inflation is like so the wage deciding manager may have some kind of a biased belief about one group, that one group is more productive or having a high quality than the other group. And based on that, they may give higher wages to one group. So we test that in signal inflation. And if you see here, like none of these coefficients are statistically significant, suggesting that we do not find the evidence of this signal inflation here. Secondly, we find we separate out identified like the undergrad universities for this scientists for foreign borns, and then we also identify what are the English language of instruction in their undergrads. And what we find here is that wage gap is statistically significant and higher for faculty with the non-English language of instruction during their undergrad. And the wage gap is still negative, but insignificant for foreign bonds who had English as language as their undergrad instructions. Later, we also separate our sample based on country of origin, based on in 7 different parts of the world, using the World Bank's definition. And what we find here is that scientists who are born in Latin American or Caribbean countries or sub-Saharan African countries have significantly higher wage gap here compared to like people, foreign born scientists from other regions of the world. Yeah, and then so this is a conclusion. So what we found here is that foreign born scientists are like, in our data, we find that they're more productive than the native born scientists. However, they earn about 4% lower in wages, that is more than $500,000. Decomposition strategy suggests that this gap is, majority of this gap is due to labor market discrimination. We find there is no evidence of, we find evidence of a direct wage discrimination. However, we do not find evidence on like a signal inflation, which is a one part of a indirect discrimination. Then we also find that the wage gap is higher for foreign born scientists who are from countries where the language of instruction is in non-English during their undergrad. We also find the gap is much higher for scientists from sub-Saharan African countries and Latin American Caribbean countries, which we usually find in the labor market discrimination literature. So what we find is that the US land-grant universities have more work to do to improving wage equity in academia. some limitations and discussions is like these estimates are crucial for like policymakers who wants to bring equity, diversity, and inclusion in the US academia, and to focus on like foreign born aspect, which is usually not so focused in the literature. These findings are contrast in the general labor market in the US, where it suggests that bachelor's and above category foreign born population earn higher than the US born population. And that doesn't seems to be true in academic setting. There are some limitations. So one is that we are considering this foreign born, or we are considering them as a foreign trained, because we are using their undergrad university as their birth country. And future work. So we are also expanding this work beyond this land grant colleges, and then also studying the gender gap in the land grant universities, how it looks like. Yeah, that is our next step. Thanks a lot, and any questions or comments, please.
One of the factors around foreign-born employees in the United States is the cost of immigration. So the cost of H-1B visa for an employer is roughly $4,000 to $6,000. If you consider it's a cost to the employer, and I feel that perhaps might be a reason behind the wage gap. Because unfortunately, and this is something I have thought often, it's quite annoying that Apple, Microsoft, Tesla get to pay the exact same fee as a university, which is supposed to be a public good. Why is there not two-tier pricing for the H-1B visa, where a land-grant university probably should pay $300 and let Tesla pay $30,000? Why should they both pay $4,000 to $6,000? Which affects this. That's one. The other thing I was thinking is that the disparity of education in developing countries is much wider than the United States. So the country that I come from, India, barring IITs, there are engineering schools at every nook and cranny of India. But you cannot guarantee that they are going to produce the same level of engineer as an IIT. And so, there is information asymmetry over here, which is going to affect the wage outcomes. Same thing with sub-Saharan countries. There's going to be asymmetry. Having worked in sub-Saharan countries for 5 years, there is asymmetry in education levels. Okay, so it's a commendable study, but there is certainly certain underlying issues, and perhaps time series data to see after a person becomes a US citizen, what happens to their wage progression from that point. So, I like the study, but I do think that as an employer, we have every right to charge a little less because they are sponsoring your H-1B visa, because it's not the employee who self-sponsors the H-1B visa, it's a cost to the land-grant person.
Right. Yeah.
Mostly it's comment, but if you have a response to.
Oh yeah.
Now, then if you can quickly summarize what was the main question that you're going to respond.
Okay. So the question is about the cost of migration, like because foreign born has to go through that H-1B process, so university has to take that cost. So that might be one reason. And also, like if we have this time series data, so once the foreign born becomes citizens here, how the wage looks like, is there a still wage gap exist or not? So I feel like all these aspects, I think there's still some form of systemic discrimination. I mean, that's, for the same, like what we are here saying is that for the same quality of two people, there are two people, they have same quality, they have same number of publication, they have same number of quality adjusted publication, ideally should get the same wages. And this is not happening here. So I think these are very important comments, but I think these are some of these factors are coming into the systemic discrimination, which is the, the indirect discrimination part of it. But yeah, addressing about H-1B visa is a really good thing to discuss. Thanks a lot.
Maybe if you can
Sorry.
reiterate. Go ahead.
Oh, great. So clarification, the university fixed effects were set to the PhD granting university or was that for the employee?
Current university, yeah, their employee university, yeah.
Because like, I mean, I think it might be important to control for the PhD granting university because I mean, with foreign students, there's just so much information asymmetry and they have more trouble landing in top program despite being as equal, equally talented. And so that would be another kind of discrimination, right? Although that happens earlier.
Right.
And then the other thing is just, I mean, I think it's a great study, and these salaries, the gap, is going to widen because you get raises based on your current salary. And so even if there was like discrimination because of visa issues at the beginning, like the impacts of that down the road would be massive, like way too big.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I can just collect two
Yeah.
more and then.
Right.
you
Sure.
can-
Sure.
Yeah, so it was a really great presentation. Thank you so much. So my question is about like in your US spectrum, this one, but also did you look at like whether they were like, although they were born in US, but they belong to different races, or did you look at them dead after or not? Were they Africans, Asians, although they were born in the United States? And also, did you look at the gender thing? Women's like usually it's being documented in the literature that women or females are really less than males. So did you look at that?
Yeah, these are very important comments. So the one is whether we have done some differences, racial differences of the US. So I think the survey what we have here, we do not have the information on that. We do not ask their races. So yeah, that we cannot do. But the gender part is yes, we are working on that, and that is like coming up in the next study. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is really discouraging, right? But part of me is thinking about like, in places where I've been, I wonder if a lot of that just like, if it is discrimination, it's like built in like really senior people's salaries that have been hugely inflated and they all look, they're all born here. So one question would be, have you looked at quantile effects? And could you look at heterogeneity by like recent hires? Because I would expect and hope, maybe this is hopeful, that discrimination doesn't exist or hopefully doesn't exist as much in people that have been hired in the last 5-10 years. But maybe it did exist in a much bigger way later. I don't know if that's true, but the answer to that question is really important. Right.
So your first question is about the quantile effect. So quantile based on like experience or based on like
the income.
Income. Okay. So in different income quantiles, how it looks like.
Yeah.
So we kind of did like based on this number of experiences, like we divide in the quantile. And yeah, it was still, I don't remember like what we found, but we tried to do that. But we did not do based on like income. So we can try to do that as well, based on income. And then the recent hire, we said, we also try to restrict only on the assistant professor, because as you said, like, starting salary might be and even we try to do like only base salaries, and so if we only do on the base salaries, we do not find a lot of gap there. For assistant professors, we also do not find that assistant professors are like driving this gap, like the newly hired, the wage gap is higher for them. So we do not also find that. So it seems like it must be somewhere after that, like somewhere in the process of additional salary or like increment or like the maybe negotiation skills, whatever it might be, and that all could come into the indirect discrimination part, which is pretty hard to quantify. But yeah, I mean, we try to do that assistant professor.
So I think that if you found nothing at the assistant professor level, that is a hugely important finding, and you should highlight that.
Right, right. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Can I ask if you can do one-on-one after the session, please? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
very
a
much.
lot.
Yeah. Okay, so as a last speaker, I have a list number of minutes to my presentation. I'll do my best to keep within the time frame, but I also want and won't be offended if you have to leave at 11:30. I'm presenting, but the title of my presentation is Effectiveness of Farmer-Led Extension that combines demonstration plots and free trial packs. And it's a field experiment we had conducted in Tanzania. It's a joint work with my colleague, Nicole Mason from Michigan State and Jared Ferris and Stephen Morgan from USDA ERS. Diffusion of new technology is sort of critical to agricultural transformation. We all know that. And extension as an institution is a means to provide and diffuse the technology widely. However, lack of capacity and poor performance is an ongoing concerns of agricultural programs in many developing countries. For example, in Tanzania, for every 630 farm households, there is one extension worker. And this translates into like only about 10% of households, have are being served by the publicly funded extension program. And given these limitations and constraints, there have been efforts to find alternative models and methods of providing extension service delivery over the years. One of such alternative method or model that has been promoted over the years is the lead farmer extension model. And one such approach that within that space that we focus in our program or in our paper is the village-based advisory extension method as implemented by FIPS Africa. So what is this lead farmer extension method as implemented by FIPS Africa? It has sort of combination of two components. One is it has it includes a method of extension as well as the tools or combination of tools they use in extending the technology. The lead farmers as a method of extension are community-based workers who are selected by village members. They are volunteers and they receive training from FIPS Africa in this case, and also the Ministry of Agriculture in Tanzania on improved practices, technologies, methods. And they are called village-based agro advisors, or VBAAs in short, which I'll be using during my presentation. And their job as a VBA is to promote farmers' awareness of new technologies, practices, inputs, and they basically serve as the principal agents of change in their community. In terms of tools of extension, they promote this awareness through two ways, two methods, or two types of tools they use. One is they conduct demonstration plots where they display improved and local varieties, and also distribute trial packs in small quantities of improved seeds or whatever other inputs they are trying to promote in a given demonstration plot. So what is the value proposition of what this method of extension adds? The research has shown that community-based extension approaches can reach greater numbers of farmers and also enhance sustainability of this institution. They can be cost-effective, they can complement traditional extension services and engender trust and service. Sorry. Excuse me, service conduits for social learning because they share common language, culture, the same kind of cultural, economic and social background as other village peer farmers. In terms of the tools of raising awareness that I mentioned, the demonstration plots and the trial packs, the value proposition of this is that both of them, they sort of promote learning, but the mechanisms are sort of a little different. In terms of demonstration plots, the main learning mechanism is learning from others. And here other is the lead farmer in the village. The demonstration plot serves as sort of a platform at the community level where farmers can observe the process as well as the performance of new technologies and learn about complementarities and can make side-by-side comparison of whatever is being compared in terms of inputs. The learning by doing happens when the lead farmer involves peer farmers to participate in the preparation and planting of those demonstration plots and sort of provide them with a hands-on experience of those improved technologies. The trial packs, in that tool, the learning by doing is the main mechanism. The trial packs allow farmers to gain firsthand, experience of and observing and sort of seeing on their own farm how those technologies perform. At the community level, they also promote learning from others in the sense that it increases more number of observational points for other farmers to observe and learn from the trial packs that were distributed in the community. The trial packs also have some additional benefits in the sense that at each farmer level, the small quantity of seeds they receive provide an opportunity to multiply on their own farm and expand slowly the area under those varieties over years or in subsequent seasons. And they also sort of increase the bi-directional learning that happens between the VBA and the farmer. So assuming that those new technologies being promoted are profitable, this learning can translate into increased willingness to use and adopt the demonstrated technologies. And there have been many studies that sort of provide this kind of evidence. For inputs that are required to be purchased every season, this learning can translate into new demand and thus more sales opportunities for those VBAs to earn additional income. So in terms of the motivation of this study, given these value propositions, we hypothesize that demonstration plots and those trial packs will have positive effect on the adoption of promoted technologies. The demand and the multiplier effect will be even larger when VBAs distribute the trial packs jointly with the demonstration plots. However, as an extension activity, adding this trial pack component adds also significantly to the cost of conducting doing this lead farmer extension. And therefore, an obvious sort of a scaling up question that motivates our study is, do these marginal benefits of trial packs outweigh their additional cost? And to date, FIPS, the NGO that implements this model, they have always conducted demonstration plots with the trial packs jointly in each community, and therefore, there has been little known from their own experience on the marginal benefits of the trial packs. Also, other studies that have evaluated the effects of demonstration plots have only done that just for demonstration plots or for trial packs, sort of disjointly. And so there have been very few rigorous evaluations of studies that look at the effectiveness of lead farmer extension approach, combining these two tools together. And so this paper tries to fill that gap where we evaluate this added value of the trial packs when they are conducted jointly with the demonstration plots. In terms of our research setting, we sort of piggyback on already implemented RCT by FIPS Africa in collaboration with SIAT and the Agricultural Research Institute in Tanzania. This was done in the southern highlands of the country. where among the 230 villages that they were going to implement new or introduce new bean varieties, 50% of those villages were randomly assigned to receive only the demonstration plot treatment, and another 50% were assigned to receive both demonstration plots as well as the trial packs. And we call them DPTP and only DP or DP only in terms of those two treatment groups. Our VBAs received 150 seed packs to distribute within the village as part of those trial pack treatment. We don't have any true control in the sense that we don't have any villages that don't have either DP or DPTP. And therefore just wanted to emphasize that when our RCT was focused mostly on assessing this marginal value addition of providing the trial packs when a demonstration plot was already being planned. These demonstration plots and trial packs, they highlighted three improved bean varieties and also showcased a seed treatment product called Apron Star. It was a new product at that time when they were promoting this. Our data come from a subset of those villages that I mentioned where the RCT was implemented. We only focused on 32 villages where 50% or 16 of those villages were under just DP only treatment, and other 60 were both in DPTP. We have 3 waves of data collection, or 3 rounds of data we had collected, 2017, 18, and 21. We did our sample attrition test and don't see any bias that was correlated with the treatment. So we are not very concerned about the attrition. We also did balance test in terms of several characteristics and find that the two treatment groups were pretty balanced in most household characteristics except 2, and we control for those in all our analysis. In terms of our empirical strategies, a very standard DID strategy where our main coefficient of interest is the interaction term of the treatment and the year or the before and after. We sort of focus on 3 outcomes, the indicator of whether the household was growing one of those promoted variety, what was the share of bean area on those varieties, and just an indicator of whether they used Apron Star or not. In terms of our the treatment participation of what happened after the before, after, and before, during, and after the intervention. As expected, or it was good that our 2 treatment groups are pretty balanced in terms of many of these indicators of treatment, like they both were aware of the presence of the VBA in their community. They had attended the mother demonstration or the demonstration plots, receiving bean trials, and also the attending those demonstration plots. The only thing that differs during the implementation year is that 19% or significantly more farmers reported in the DPTP village to have received the free seed or the trial packs. There were also some lingering effects of this treatment in the next year on some other indicators. In terms of results, just descriptively, these are by year and by the treatment and the 2 treatment groups, the uptake or adoption or farmer reported uptake of those 3 bean varieties. We see pre-intervention, the adoption is just around 10%. It increased significantly after the intervention in 2018, increased further in 2020, and slightly declined in 2021. The other thing to notice is at least descriptively, we see not much difference between the uptake of these varieties in the two types of treatment groups. The story is very similar for bean area. I'm not going to go into that. The one thing about the apron star, our third outcome that we are focusing is that the main point here is very low uptake of this. Very few people reported using this, and there was a steady decline in this after the intervention. So those were descriptive results. Our econometric results sort of confirm what we visually saw, that there was no, the main variable of interest is the interaction term here, and we don't see any significant effect of this added value of distributing trial packs. And this sort of persists not just 1 year after the intervention, but also over the 3 and 4 years after that we collected data. We also do some adoption correlates and heterogeneity, which in the interest of time, not going to go through them. Just to summarize our main results and implications, the main takeaway here is that at least 1 year and 3 to 4 years after the intervention, we see significant increase in the adoption of those varieties across both types of villages, but no detectable statistically significant difference between the two interventions. And so one of the implications of this is that excluding trial packs, which is the costly component of this extension model, could save resources without significantly reducing the benefits if adoption is the key outcome that the NGO or anybody is interested in. The resources saved from by dropping this component could then be used to further expand the benefits of lead farmer extension only based on the demonstration plots and to more communities. In terms of the correlates of adoption and heterogeneity effects, which I didn't go through them, but the main highlight over there is that the adoption was positively correlated with the intensity of program exposure and some of the farmer characteristics. And so in terms of implications, some of this, what those in the short term and long term, those correlates were, I've listed them, and again, I'm not going to go through them, but just to highlight the implications of this is that the effectiveness of extension programs can be increased if by considering the role of these different characteristics while designing the demonstration plots as well as the trial pack distribution. The targeting of the promotional activities can be targeted to farmers with characteristics that are associated with low probability of adoption. In terms of implications for the design features of the lead farmer extension, our results have some implications in terms of the number of VBAs per village, the location of demonstration plots, and also the number of trial packs that can be distributed by the VBAs. However, we note that further research on what is this optimal farmer to VBA ratio and the intensity of exposure to extension activities to increase their effectiveness is an area that needs further research. That's it. Sorry, I took a little more time, and we may, I don't know, you are the moderator now. Do we have a few minutes to ask?
Well, we're at time, so if anyone needs to go, feel free to. But if anyone has questions, maybe we can take one, and then the rest we can. Any of us are probably going to chat after, so why don't you go ahead?
Thank you very much.
Okay. So you are, I'll just repeat for the people who are online. There were two questions. One was what explains the little bit decline in 2021? And the second is about the sustainability, given that there is no evidence of the the adoption impact, how can it be sustainable? So I think this graph can tell you the sort of the story behind why the decline in 2021 slightly. Our 2021 survey we had done, we sort of went back to the same villages and the same VBAs, and we found that in 2020, only 40% were active as VBAs in those villages. And there was still some activity in terms of conducting demonstration plots and distributing trial packs and selling inputs. But in 2021, hardly anybody, or very few VBAs were active, and none of those activities took place in 2021. We verified, we went to the FIPS Africa and asked them what's happening, and they confirmed, or they said that they have totally exited from Tanzania a few years ago, or just few seasons after we had participated in this RCT with them. And so to answer your question on sustainability, to me, it's not about that we don't see any impact. I think it is very positive that the lead farmer extension did increase. Of course, we cannot attribute it to lead farmer extension, but the increased adoption of the varieties, to me, was a positive story of something was working with that extension model. Again, because we don't have a pure control, I cannot say it was because of that model. So our finding is more about the added value of the trial pack, and we cannot say that it was effective in that sense. We are not saying anything about the effectiveness of the lead farmer itself. And to me, the sustainability issue is more to do with an NGO withdrawing and exiting from a country and everything collapses. And that is the real sustainability question. I guess, in the beginning, I said one of the value proposition, or the reason why this is being promoted, is that it is cost effective and can be sustainable. And at least our study shows that in this particular case, the sustainability question is a questionable attribute of this model. If the whole thing is relying on one NGO and they just decide to quit.